So this is from a book, Spiritual Intelligence and the Neuroplastic Brain by Charles W. Mark. Now, I haven't read the book. I just found this when I was searching, so I don't know if I can recommend it or anything, but let's just start with this here. Designed to be plastic, learns to speak, read, write, and count. Marianne Wolfe, professor of child development at Tufts University, is an expert on the subject of what is called the reading brain, as well as on the subject of dyslexia. She is the author of the well-acclaimed book, The Proust and the Squid, The Story of the Science of the Reading Brain. Professor Wolfe begins the first chapter of her book with the words, "We were never born to read." In the same breath, she writes, "Reading is one of the most remarkable inventions in history, and the ability to record is one of its consequences. Reading and writing, with possible exception of mathematics, is a human invention that has been perfected over a period of 5,400 years, especially after the invention of alphabets 3,800 years ago and the printing press in 1450 AD. We have come to learn in the 21st century that we have about 25,000 genes in the human genome. One of the astonishing facts about this number is we humans do not seem to possess a special gene that genetically predisposes us to acquire skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic, unlike the genes that carry out our hereditary characteristics. However, scientists remind us that ASPM variant, a microcephaly-associated gene, might have gone through microscopic changes with the spread of agriculture and with the invention of reading and writing 5,400 years ago. Now, that's very interesting, especially with what I got into about where agriculture most likely came from. And I find it very interesting that this is discussed in the same breath as the creation of reading and writing. But we'll get more into that as we go. So, a gene is a part of DNA, and genes determine and govern the structure and function of cells. We humans have trillions of cells. There are genes that determine destiny of the fetus, like how many neurons the brain will have, as well as size of the brain, color of skin, hair height, and so on. There are genes that determine how the fetus, as it develops in mother's womb, would modulate the sensory awareness of vision, touch, smell, hearing, emotions, and sounds upon arriving into the world as a full-grown baby. Stanislas Dehaene is in his highly acclaimed work, Reading in the Brain, The Science and Evolution of a Human Invention, shares his research findings. Dehaene says that genetics did not predispose humanity to invent skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the brain's plasticity allowed humanity to create an artificial cultural environment for itself so that it could teach itself skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic. So this is pretty amazing because this goes back to what I was saying when I was discussing the theory of evolution and how it's essentially an alibi for the force that is orchestrating, our collective perception of reality. And, this person takes it in the context of the traditional view that, we are human beings who have evolved from apes. And this was all just some natural process where, we adapted to read and write these languages and created an artificial cultural environment for ourselves. I mean, that's just an amazing statement. So I think, I don't need to read any more there. I'll put the link down in the description. But so when he's talking about the brain's plasticity, the idea of neuroplasticity is essentially that, contrary to like a lot of the conventional wisdom out there, I mean, because it's a relatively new concept in the grand scheme of things, that the brain is not static. Before kind of this theory came out there was the widely held belief that, we developed a certain amount of adaptability in childhood, but then, as we grow into adults, the brain is kind of limited in its ability to change. It becomes fixed. But, most of the research that they're doing now shows that the brain is not fixed at all. And like, for example, which I thought was pretty interesting, down here, contrary to conventional thought as expressed in this diagram, brain functions are not confined to certain fixed locations. So it's more of a field that is a field of energy that is constantly reorienting itself through the synapses, and it's very plastic, meaning it has the ability to change. So in the context of the homeostatic equilibrium post, I think it's very interesting that the brain is, if you assume that there has been a sort of a force outside of our own natural evolution that has been orchestrating a lot of this, if they knew that our brains were very plastic, then it makes total sense. The way that we have quote unquote evolved makes total sense if there has been a force aware that we have this ability to adapt. And especially in the context of reading and writing, we have no genes for that. There's no genes for written language. That's something that we learned. That's something that we adapted to. Now, of course, we always have had the ability for spoken language. And in fact, there is no other mammal on the planet that has the same voice box that we have and the same sort of like vocal inbuilt ability to communicate verbally. But that doesn't mean, that's not synonymous with the concept of language itself. And especially these, like the English language, which we'll get into, these things were learned by us after the fact. So there's all sorts of, this is like way beyond my level of understanding, like, as far as examining the brain, because I just don't think it's necessary to view it in such a structured way. But there's all sorts of variations on the idea of plasticity, like non-synaptic plasticity is a form of neuroplasticity that involves modification of ion channel function in the axon, dendrites, and cell body that results in specific changes in the integration of excitatory postsynaptic potentials and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. So, that's like a computer regurgitating what the brain is. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's gibberish to me. Anyway, and then there's the idea of homeostatic plasticity, which refers to the capacity of neurons to regulate their own excitability relative to network activity, a compensatory adjustment that occurs over the timescale of days. Synaptic scaling has been proposed as a potential mechanism of homeostatic plasticity. And if you go down here, it just kind of gives you the overall idea, where the term derives from two opposing concepts: homeostatic, a product of the Greek words for same and state or condition, and plasticity or change. Thus, homeostatic plasticity means staying the same through change, which I think is very interesting, because that, in a sense, explains how the brain and our ability to perceive certain things would still essentially stay the same, although it is undergoing subtle changes as the centuries progress. And in this connection, the printing press is really interesting, especially in the context of cybernetics, because, well, first of all, let me just read the definition. A printing press is a device for applying pressure to an inked surface resting upon a print medium, such as paper or cloth, thereby transferring the ink. And so, first of all, it's really interesting that, as far as the medium as the message goes, the printing press was kind of the first instance of this, in the sense that the paper becomes the message, right? Because before the printing press came about, everyone would be writing the English language themselves, like in letters. And I was actually listening to a Terence McKenna talk where he made this point when he was discussing McLuhan. He's like, yeah, before the printing press, people would be actually reading a letter and like paying attention to this M, the way it was shaped, or the way that they wrote this word. And it would be a more interactive and like thought intensive process, which goes away once the printing press comes along. I mean, just what we're reading right now, it's a standardized version of writing, right? So so the medium, the paper and the letters kind of become a subtle part of the message, more so than the actual words, right? Because reading just becomes a thing then. Like you read the page, you don't actually look at it. You know what I'm saying? So going back down to, let's see, within several decades, well, actually, first, the mechanization of book making coincidentally led to the first mass production of books in Europe. And, within several decades of that, the printing press spread to over 200 cities in a dozen European countries. By 1500, printing presses in operation through Western Europe had produced more than 20 million volumes. So this is a huge change that happened in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, where the written language became mechanized, right? It became a sort of feedback loop. And especially since, the King James Bible was the first book to be mass produced. So it was the main book being read at the time. And, like it says right here, that's why we call the media the press to this day, right? Because it's going back to this incident in coincidental history. So that is kind of just like the background that I wanted to get into before getting into ideas about staged events, 9/11, and what that whole thing was about. Because when you get to the television, you can see how the idea of the medium is the message is the same as the printing press. Because whereas with the printing press, it was the paper or the cloth that the mechanical, what do they call that? I know they use a term for that. The master copy, right? So like the master copy, that would be, I think it was metal for the printing press, but you put that in and then it does all the copies. But with the television, it is, it's not the cloth, it's the actual screen, which becomes the medium for the moving pictures that are streamed on it. And pictures, you can view that as a shift in perception, right? With photography, you go from reading the written word to viewing an actual image. And going back to like the neuroplasticity of the brain, our brains have through the past 50 years of the television being in well, I mean movies started in the 30s, but it was basically post World War II when the television became a staple. And so in that sense, it's homeostatic plasticity, right? There's subtle changes happening to your brain and the way your neurons are firing, and you could even view it as they're rewiring to perceive a new form of information, which is the moving picture. And if you've ever done any research into what the television is actually doing, I mean, this has amazing implications, because let me just read some of this right here. Have you ever used a notepad or flipbook to create simple animation? By drawing slightly different sketches on several sheets of paper and viewing them in rapid sequence, you create the illusion of movement. If you slow down the process, the animation becomes uneven and choppy. but if you move at a steady, rapid pace, it can be very convincing. This illusion forms the basis for film. And I think that's a very good way to view what the television is, because our minds, our conscious mind cannot perceive the refresh rate. We just see what appears to be a moving image, right? But it's really like, one of these flip books where it's, well, especially film, like it's those images being flipped at the exact rate that your conscious mind can't perceive that it's actually, the still images coming through on the film. So there's that has a lot of implications actually for reality itself, because there's a lot of people that discuss the idea of a holographic reality. And if you consider it in terms of like reality's refresh rate, our conscious ability to perceive in our current state, which is, not the state that our perceptive abilities are designed to be in, we perceive physical reality as a moving film, right? That's solid and very real. And that's where the concept of a holographic reality comes from. It's like, well, outside of our limited ability to perceive, there could be, something going on similar to the way a television is fed, or a movie screen is fed film from a projector, and it refreshes at a rate that's beyond your ability to perceive the process that's actually taking place. But to say that reality is an illusion based on that, that's kind of a non sequitur, because we're all experiencing the same physical reality. And so, you can't, to say it's not real would be foolish. I mean, we're all experiencing the same thing, so it's real for all of us. But the actual details of how that's transpiring, then you can get into ideas of like a holographic reality. But that's a little neither here nor there. So let's see. Let's go to here, and I'm going to start talking about 9/11 in relation to this, because, of course, when you talk about the television screen and the movie screen, you inevitably will come square against the idea of the monolith, which, of course, is the movie screen. And then you have the monolith at ground zero, and, of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and everything that goes along that. Now, I'm not going to get into everything. I would recommend you read this post, because these concepts are just difficult to speak about. I think, the refinement that I put into, or anyone else that's, doing similar work as this, there's a certain refinement that goes into writing it out, that well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. Like, I'm much better at writing the stuff out than I am about speaking about it. But so I think, 9/11 there's just so many, it's incredible, really. I mean, it's just an incredible event. And 9/11 as really, it was a divination, like, because not only could you view the monolith as the movie screen, but it's also a black mirror. It's a scrying mirror. And of course, a scrying mirror, scrying is the ancient art of clairvoyance achieved by concentrating on an object, usually one with a reflective surface, until visions appear. The use of the black mirror is one of the best methods of achieving the state of mind required for entering trance and for scrying work, which, again, going back to 9/11, like, you've got a big black mirror slash, movie screen monolith overlooking ground zero. And, what is it that they use to carry out the psychological operation but the medium of the television, right? So I mean, it's all one and the same thing. It's incredible, really. Now, of course, if you're listening to this and you think that 3,000 people died on that day, it would seem probably a little, I don't know, mean. What's the word? Like inconsiderate, maybe. How about that? It would seem maybe inconsiderate to call something incredible where that many people died, but you got to understand that 3,000 people didn't die that day, and that's all part of the magic ritual of it and the sleight of hand that takes place in a staged event like this. And I don't know if I'll get into that in this video or not, but I might save that for another one and talk about NASA too, just because there's so much disinformation going on right now on YouTube, especially about this kind of stuff. But so I've been just toying with the idea of divination and 9/11, and like, of course, if you've read this post, like, I don't need to tell you about just all of the, because I'm not even talking about like the quote unquote synchronicities that surround this event and all of the um, the stuff that's subliminally planted in the media decades in advance, foreshadowing the event, all of the crazy, stuff like that happened on the day. This was a great find. The newspaper itself was a monolith. Again, going back to the printing press, and it being the printing press was one of the earlier versions of the monolith of the movie screen, right? And going back to the idea of neuroplasticity, it is, and the whole point of this post, and really the same theme is throughout everything that I write, is this subtle rewiring of the brain to perceive reality in a different way. And that is the iPhone is a monolith too, and that's like the pocket supercomputers post that I made about how your very perception is being altered. You're creating a new synapse structure in your brain. And let me just say, like, it's a very like Western reductionist thing to say that your perception is taking place in your brain. It's just, of course, the truth is that it's a holistic, um, energetic thing. It's not, you know, being processed all in the brain. That's ridiculous. But, the way that it is true that, four of your major senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, and speaking are coming from, and well, and, touch also, but that's throughout the whole body. But like those main five senses are, four of them are taking place right where the brain is located. So it's only natural that it would be supposed that this is the seat of consciousness, but that's not the case. And I'm going to be getting into that if I ever can find the time to write out Homeostatic Equilibrium Part 2. So, and along these lines, I thought it was really interesting, like especially regarding that, the way that when they put the image of the text messages on the actual screen itself, it takes the mind to a place where where you actually can, it triggers that synapse that's building in your mind, the digital synapse. And I just thought it was interesting to compare Tony Stark interacting with Jarvis, right, which is a artificial intelligence system that he perceives sort of holographically in his field of vision, with Dave Bowman from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and of course Dave Bowman, like the Rainbow Man, and 42 degrees being the degree at which you can see a rainbow, and and Jupiter and all that. It's all there. I'm not gonna. Many people have gone into that information.